the hold harmless is 5 years, and the full transition to 95% from 70% is 10 years. That's the way it's written. And, you know, you put the pieces of the puzzle together, and in those first 5 years, communities will be protected, although less and less, because the transition grants can be phasing out too. So you really have to look at how it plays out municipality by municipality to see and understand its import.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Jim. So the transition money goes, maybe I'm not understanding right, the transition money is going to the communities that now keep the excess swept?
I believe that's right. Yeah.
And it's that's part of the transition, so they'll get 95% of it to start out with, and we'll go down to 75%.
The other way around.
It started.
Starting at 70.
They'll get 75% of it
70%.
at the beginning, and then if they get more,
It's 70% of the new calculated foundation opportunity grant is what they'll get at the beginning, and a excess swept town that under the new calculations would still get more money from swept than it would get from this grant would not get a grant.
thank you.
Representative Woodcock, did you have your hand up?
I think I understand it. If I just, for a simplified version.
Yeah. Good luck.
So the grants that are coming in, assume that the new grant level, our town is here. And during the 5-year period, that where they are right now, it's either up to meet that, and they'll always meet that 5-year grant at that level, 5 years, because we're finding they do whatever the new level is.
Well, the transition grant phases out, so it's 100% in the first year of the gap,
Okay.
and then 80% of the gap, and 60%, and so on. And the gap is changing too, because you're also having a sloping up of the grant. You got to put the two together and see where it comes out.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions of Representative Ames?
No,
But you're welcome to sit there because I'm sure there will be more as we go through this bill.
so when we had a subcommittee on this bill, before we made the decision to implement it.
Yeah.
Dave gave us a bunch of suggestions that he thought
Yep, he did.
needed to be done to the bill to make it better, fairer, work better. We haven't talked about those.
That's what I was hoping that when we have Dave next, that we can do that. That's why I think we need one more meeting. I had suggestions that I'm not quite agreeable to the weighted formula for this special education. When we're having a weighted formula, 4-point something, I think 4 let's call it 4.1 of that, and don't call it the base, but that amount which they're multiplying it by for all 13 categories. I think that may be overkill. Well, that was part of the amendment we had for the extraordinary needs, which was, at that time, it was Senator Hennessy's bill. And I was trying to get a better handle on that.
Did it die in committee?
Well, it was unanimous in our committee, passed the House on consent, and that was stripped in House Finance, that amendment. Although House Finance Chair did say to me, now the Chair of Finance, she agrees that a weighted factor is something that I would say over half the states use right now to, be able to allocate that appropriation out to schools for various categories. And I know that there are categories which require a lot more assistance throughout the day, and support to the child, and expertise, which is above and beyond reading and language and mathematics. There are really some of real issue, along with the other health impaired we're seeing right now, which are dealing with. I don't want to call them behavior, because behavior is something that's learned, and it's not necessarily always been an IEP category. However, emotional issues and all which have been developed are now significant and causing disruptions where chairs are flying around in some of the classrooms, and you have to evacuate the classroom before you can get a good handle on it. That's certainly disrupting things. Yes.
Yeah, I passed out to the committee this article called "A Tale of Two Schools." And I just happened to find this article as I was rummaging through stuff. This is an article that appeared in the Concord Monitor, March 1984, 38 years ago. And it compares Hopkinton High School with Pittsfield High School. Now, you'll note the lovely young lady that's sitting in the lower part just happens to be my daughter. But when I read this article, I was saying to myself, whoa, not much has changed in 38 years. As a matter of fact, if you were to compare Pittsfield High School and Hopkinton High School today, the situation would be worse than it was 38 years ago. And so that's just one point. The other point I wanted to make too, Rick, was when we had the Education Oversight Committee meeting last week, we had representatives from the department there, and they basically reviewed their, what's it called, iPlatform?
Yeah.
Their iPlatform. And they have populated that with all kinds of data. Much of the same data that we use in the commission, actually. And I went up to Dr. Green afterwards and asked him if basically the data came from the Form 25 that the school districts submit. And in fact, it does. And my point is that if you look to see where we are today, with the information that's available, the data that's available, the progress of students' data that's available, none of that was there when the original input model was created years ago, like 38 years ago. And it just seems to me that we now have an opportunity to take that significant data dump that they've got to begin to look at a different way of funding schools to make sure that at least as the commission has suggested, that the current funding that we have available for schools from the state, that it then be allocated in a different format than just the one size fits all that we have right now. And I'm not trying to be critical of the original structure that was created, because that's what we had. I mean, that's all we had was how many desks do you have? What's the average teacher salary? What's the benefit package? How many nurses do you have? I mean, all that stuff was the only thing we had at the time that we created the current system. Now, we have a whole plethora of data that's available that can be used in a much more, I believe, and a much more significant way to begin to really look at student achievement, how schools are doing. And the other thing that I think that's implicit in this bill is a much higher accountability of how the money is being spent. You don't have much accountability when you get $4,000 per kid across the board. You don't know what happens to that money. With the concept of this provides a much greater detailed accountability of how the money is being spent, and where there are problems, it's incumbent upon the school district then to create a plan upon which to deal with those students, that student population that needs to become more competitive, have greater outcomes, et cetera. So my comment was, I took from our meeting that we had last week, just the data that's available now that wasn't there before, that we should be able to use to provide a much more robust manner with which we basically create a funding system. Thank you.
Well, just to tag in on that, Mel, from that meeting we had with the Legislative Oversight Committee, for those here, we were looking at one of the issues which we brought up was we know that over the last 14 years that I've been here, that we've seen a slide in mathematics achievement at the middle school level. And we've also seen that occur even more rapidly since the pandemic. And we know all the issues with the pandemic. My concern that I brought up was we know what the minimum standards of public school approval are. How many on this committee have actually seen the academic standards that this state has for mathematics? I've not seen them. But that's okay. There you go. The frameworks are not to be considered that. The frameworks are basically guidelines, and we no longer have frameworks, nor do we have those guidelines. My concern is that when we're looking for accountability, we're using, and I'm a believer in statistics and state assessments or assessing to determine. There's a lot of different ways of doing it. Some school districts do it with their own locally developed diagnostic instruments like the STAR Math or the NWEA or some other type of instrument for assessment, and they do that periodically through the school year. They are measuring with an instrument that they feel most closely reflects what their curriculum is and what their instruction is in terms of the sequence that instruction occurs within that high school or that middle school or elementary school. We are assessing with the statewide assessment, and we know we have that assessment supposed to be built around our standards, but curriculum is a local responsibility. And when you teach it this year or the following year, so we don't know if necessarily that those local curriculums are aligned with this instrument we're using to assess with. Many districts, and in fact, I was just working with a group in a school district this last week, they prefer to use their own assessment. They have to use the statewide, but they have their own assessment because they know that's measuring what they are in fact are teaching. So I think to a degree, there's a disconnect in the information we're getting back, and when we do get it back, how engaged are we in working with those school districts to try and show those places we need to gain. And I don't know if all the districts are doing that either. Yeah.
School teaching in 2002 because No Child Left Behind and its high reliance standardized tests that didn't necessarily measure what children were learning in school. And I got involved in the state. At that time, we had committees and we had to perform and test questions for the statewide assessments. There was an interesting experience. And what I learned in there was that in order to make a valid test, you eliminate the questions that most kids got right. That's how they do those tests. So if the teacher was spending all her time in second grade teaching the children about tens and adding with regrouping and blah, 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 and they all were getting it very well, they use those kids as test-making kids, all those questions on the stuff that they basically teach would be eliminated because too many kids got it right. They would take it as being too easy and too many kids, because too many kids got right, which left the testing questions to be all of the kinds of things that we didn't spend a long time on. It's in second grade, for example, teaching. So there's always been that gap, even with the tests that the state uses. There has to be a better way of assessing how the child is learning and whether the child is achieving at the maximum level for that child than a standardized test. Or something that's one size fits all. But once you have different tests, different methods being used in different districts, then you're losing your ability to compare, you know, Hopkinton, Hillsborough. So it's really a conundrum. It's really a catch-22, in my opinion. So I would really love to see us come up with some way of measuring the results of school other than testing. And that's my little lecture for today.
Yeah, we could talk forever on testing. We could.
Really dismayed at how tests were made, how the actual test questions that were used, and how they were scored, and why they were chosen, and it was hard. It was interesting, too.
Well, I think that accountability, when we say accountability is the strength of this, I'd like to ask the questions exactly how are you going to hold these districts accountable? What's the process, and what's the process to make sure they're coming out with that performance outcome that we're seeking based upon the fact that Napshaw's always does well in comparison to the rest of the states and using the norm reference test that we use. But how do we, understand that the results are reflecting the curriculum that's being taught? I don't know. In terms of, it's a local decision. And do we have the oversight from DOE to ensure that you are teaching the curriculum, the academic standards that we set for the state? What's to prevent a teacher from closing the door and saying, I'm going to do my thing? I don't know if we ever get to that accountability we're looking for in the dollars. Is it just basically we're looking at averages here? We're not looking at individuals, are we?
There has to be some kind of way, though, that you can measure results by what happens in the future. I think I talked about that a while ago. What happens when the kids leave the system? They go out into the world, they prepare. And that's what, in my opinion, public school is for, is to make sure that we have students going out into the world of work, prepared to work, and also prepared to be civically active. Those are our goals, to keep our democracy going. Everybody gets education so they can move up the ladder, and everybody learns how the system works so they don't get swept away by a demagogue. But we don't do that.
Well, we do to a degree, don't we? We have the performance indicators that are reported at the end of the year annually, dealing with discipline, with the ASVAB, how they test out in the military, how many go on to post-secondary education, disciplinary issues. There must be a good 13 of those indicators that we measure along with the statewide achievement test. We have those results. No, we have it every year. When we get, well, we have it based upon, at graduation, those are at graduation, but we also have grades 3 through 8 and grade 11 on that test. Yes.
What the line to make, I'm off basic, I don't take it correct, is that the tests that's on the school districts not consistent across the state in terms of when the instruction is being presented for the youngster. So the state norm test is still going to show you how they did, but they may not receive that information yet. So the question becomes then, how do you determine a level of accountability that Representative Miles is talking about that's affected by the results of the academic testing if the baseline academic testing is not consistent. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we're trying to do it that way.
Well, I get that raises the other issue. I don't know if Representative Weil or this is something I've missed in here, but is that we're not going to have local curriculum, then you can't use a state norm test to be the division in terms of more funding or less funding based on how we're doing that. If in fact it's not equal measure.
If those local curriculums echo the academic standards, you can.
Yeah, if they do.
Yeah, I don't know if they do right now or not. How will we ever determine and learn that? That's always been my question.
So one interesting thing, and I'm presuming it's maybe different now because I know many middle schoolers are taking pre-algebra. But when I was doing this studying about this, when we talk about the national tests, the international tests and how we always scored so poorly in mathematics, it was pointed out that if the test was given, say, in 8th grade, and our students scored below the kids from Finland, it's because the kids from Finland had already had algebra, and our kids didn't get it until next year. So it was that same kind of thing that Steve was talking about. When it was taught, wasn't that our kids were not achieving, they just weren't achieving in a subject that they hadn't learned yet. I remember the social studies curriculum and the tests that they had in the 11th grade, tested on U.S. history. But U.S. history was taught in the 11th grade, and the test was given at the beginning of the 11th grade, and the last time they had U.S. history was the 8th grade. So it was that kind of thing, that kind of mess.
That's exactly why a number of years ago, we took the responsibility for assessing social studies away from the state and handed it down to the local districts to have an assessment done. That's in statute right now. But, in terms of trying to target funds to help those groups and those areas which need that support, I can remember we had a program called Math Learning Communities. And that program was one which was initiated through Beth Dorian over at the community college system over at NHDI. And at the end of the 10th grade, or towards the end, we would have the, what do they call it then? The Accuplacer, the next generation Accuplacer, which was done at that time for going over to post-secondary education to the community college level. We were also administering it under this grant program to students coming out of Algebra 1 in the 10th grade. Those that scored a 63 or lower were seen by the teacher, by parent, and by the others in the school as probably going to have a difficult time going into Algebra 2. So then the option was available to go to either Course 1, which was an advanced mathematics, which was built on learning style and teaching style and more of a hands-on, and it brought a different way of teaching in. And then if they had a 63 or lower, they went into that. If they had a score which is similar, a little bit higher, they could go into what they called quantitative math later on in the 4th year, which was the Course 2, which they would get the credit for the post-secondary math requirement. We had about 35 high schools involved with that. The funding is now stopped, and the program, even though it's on the books and statute, is no longer used. And I talked to Beth this morning following our meeting. I said, why are we not doing it? She said, it's all about funding. We made a lot of progress, and we were seeing an increase of a decrease of remedial students coming into post-secondary education, which at that time we had 60% that needed remedial mathematics in post-secondary in the associate's degree. And of that 60%, 50% never got the associate's degree, but spent money trying. And so it was lost time, lost effort, lost money. And so there's a program which was obviously doing something that when the grant stopped, there was no money available for teacher training, there was no money for materials, and it's kind of dissolved. Even though it's on the books and statute right now, I think it's 194:I think. There's a small title there which addresses that. So back to funding. That's also funding, though. That's how funding impacts.
So far, next meeting, David, go through the changes that,
I'd like to have, if we could, have Dave give some more feedback to us of how this works with the SWEP and how this transition really unfolds. See, so we can, we had a spreadsheet. I don't have mine with me today. Yeah, we did have one, but to take us through that, I got it at the house, so I can look at it. But I was hoping that we could go through that one time today. No, there was a spreadsheet that he had, which showed how this impacted everywhere in the state, all districts. Very small print. Yeah. The other part of the equation, which I wrote when I was on the study commission with you, Representative Myler, was how do we measure the effectiveness of leadership in the building? I'm a strong proponent that strong leadership is necessary to have strong growth and achievement from the student side. How do you measure that? How do we know that the schools, you may have some schools which are getting decent funding, at least their DOE 25 form reflects it, but their scores are not there. Why? Is that one of those non-tangibles? Aspiration of the community, culture in the school, leadership?
it's fun. It's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine, a young teacher, and he has a new principal this year. And he just was excited. I mean, he was visibly excited about what she was doing, how she was doing it. Not that the one that who retired was bad at all. He was good too. But it was just nice to see a teacher who was just excited about what he was seeing and experiencing and feeling with this new administrator that he had. And you're right. I don't know how you measure it other than, you have to measure it. I would think you have to look to see how the kids do ultimately. I think that's the ultimate test to me is how the kids are performing. And how do we provide the support in those areas that they're not performing. And I think that's been my concerns as I've been on this committee, and that is, how do you help school districts that need additional resources, whether it be from a fiscal standpoint or from a personnel standpoint, or the actual curriculum that they're using may not be working. That's a concern that I have. And I think, frankly, what we're talking about here in 1680 can get to that. Because right now, I just don't see the accountability there for how we fund schools. I mean, everybody gets the same amount of money. That's it. You get the check, that's it. How do we provide some incentives for people to perform and give kids an equal opportunity across the state?
Representative Porter?
So I have a question. I should know this better than I do. When I first got elected in 2010, I was taking the seat of a wonderful man, Hillsborough, and we talked about whether what he told me was the Constitution of the state requires that all children receive the same. The Constitution says they have to all be treated equally. And that was the reason why, when they worked out the formula, because he was in when they were doing that, why it ended up that everybody got the same. It's because you give more to one community than to another because it was unconstitutional to do that. Does anybody know anything about that? Does that ever come up in any of the discussions? Or was it just a private conversation that you and I had?
It comes out of the Londonderry and Claremont cases. That's where it all evolved from. And you cannot discriminate in your funding due to the wealth of a community. Their poverty or that, you got they all deserve the same base amount. And then it's made up differently, and that formula that came out in 2008 had physical capacity disparity aid within it. And that's where they use something likened to the equalized property valuation and the median family income to whether a municipality qualified for additional money outside of the base adequacy, which was what, 3,456, something like that, and differentiated aid. That's your adequacy amount right there. Everything.
That made it okay?
Yeah.
It's one number that everybody was getting.
And that money's not, it's sent to the school district and it's not targeted. In other words, differentiated aid for special education within that differentiated aid, it can be used any which way, along with the English language learner and the special education. There was a category for special education, as you recall, in that based on poverty. And when it got up to 48% or higher poverty in your school, you got another whole base amount on top of that for each child in that school. That formula in itself was, I thought, a very good formula. We never funded it properly. In fact, that's the formula who was the senator at that time that did that? I wasn't here, I was in Alaska at the time, but I felt during the commission study, she was on the commission. Yeah.
Nancy Stein.
No, not Nancy. No. Yeah, it started with an S. Likes, but I'll think of it. But I thought that, when I was in the commission study, I would like to see us really just, along with the Augenblick formula, if we funded things properly all along, we wouldn't be where we are right now.
I'm sorry to keep bringing these things up. So my late husband was born in East Washington, New Hampshire. Little Terrace. Parents who are well educated from New York had come up to New Hampshire to live the life in the 1930s. So when George was born in 1950, they sent me to school in New Hampshire. And I had a letter my mother-in-law wrote talking about the importance of funding education in the state of New Hampshire in 1951. It's the same problem that we had. Yeah.
If you need another one down for Representative Hall, I think there's more right there. I think that today we can, there are certain things we can agree upon. Some of the funding mechanisms in there I have some problems with, but one thing I can agree upon is this is the data report that I put together back when we were doing the subsequent study with Representative Umberger, where I tried to identify by quartiles here on the equalized property valuation per pupil. And you see there on group number 1 there, where they have less than $660,000 per pupil. There were a total of 26 municipalities in that quartile, or in that group. And you can see that in quartile 1 and quartile 2, you had, and that's, as we look at the 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1 and 2 are below proficiency on our statewide assessment now. So 1 and 2 on this are also, but the quartile wise. So you can see that there's 85% of the students in those, 85% of those districts, the students were in quartiles 1 and 2 when associated with dollars. If you go all the way up to group 4, and you look at those which have $1 million plus per pupil on equalized property valuation, you can see that there are 73%, or excuse me, there's 60% of the students are in quartiles 3 and 4. So it shows that there is a relationship, and this was taken out of our old achievement test, which we have statewide. It hasn't changed a lot. That it shows that there's a relationship between achievement and poverty.
So money does make a difference. It does, we know that.
That's something we went into the whole study knowing that. And I don't think there's any denying that. There's a lot of other variables, but this is one of the outcomes right here. Yeah.
Are the group 5 cities, are they included in 1, 2, 3, 4, or is that a separate category?
That's a separate category. I pulled them out, and you can see that of the 13 cities, 11 of them are in quartiles 1 and 2. And there were 2 cities in 3 and 4. That was done way back in 2018.
When
Yeah.
you're defining cities,
Incorporated
Manchester, Nashville,
Franklin, Berlin.
but even amongst those, there's a difference.
Yeah.
In population.
Yes, yeah.
Sort of use the data to do that.
The two cities in the bottom are Keene and Portsmouth. Lebanon's way up. Lebanon has high achievement.
We're talking the bottom being lower, not the bottom top.
Which were,
You were talking about being, you weren't talking
it says, Group 5 information indicates that cities are more likely to have high numbers of low-performing students regardless of equalized valuation. Keene and Portsmouth being the exception according to this data. Those were the 2 at that time which were just not reflecting what the other 11 were.
What year was this?
2018. And we used it in that study back then to come up with recommendations. And this was also shared during the commission study. And it kind of echoed what AIR was showing us.
those, generally speaking terms, those communities, the ability to invest more than students, see more of their investment moving forward, successful end.
That's what it appears to
That-
with growth and achievement.
If you take that same parallel, it would make sense at this report is that you have to invest more to bring those folks in quadrant 1 and 2 up.
And I think what
So quadrile,
on that point, Steve, what the commission was doing was taking the current amount of money that has been allocated to fund schools but allocating it in a different format to deal with exactly what you're talking about. That in those areas that had greater need, that's where some more funds need to go in there with the accountability function in there. I think it was 5 years. There was a 5-year time frame for schools that were low performing to begin to turn around, because you can't turn around schools just overnight. I mean, it takes time, but it deals with the leadership, it deals with the funding, and that's what the commission was talking about, is how do you take that current amount of money, not additional money in the pool. You take that pool of money and you basically allocate it in a different kind of a way than what we're currently doing.
Well, it's also imperative that you're measuring what you're teaching. And that goes back to the alignment.
it's not, there's nothing that we control this.
No, but there's a lot of contributors to what we're doing and what we're trying to fund. And I believe that any kind of recommendation I would offer is a supplement to up or down. to the up. I would also say that there's, like the academic standards, how do we ensure that the test we're using is measuring the academic standards as taught in that particular school? We do not have control over instruction and curriculum. And so you, Mr. Principal, would be teaching something, US history, at a different grade level than what this instrument would be measuring. So your kids would never show it, but doesn't mean they're not walking out the door at 12th grade knowing that stuff.
I would be sure as a principal, I won't teach it the year before the test, not the year after.
But see, I don't want to be funding, though, a lot of money based upon some data we're getting, which is not reflective of the quality of teaching. You've just mentioned, Representative Myler, that there was a change in leadership principalship in the school, and kids are excited, teachers are excited. That's exactly the same occurrence that's occurring in Woodsville High School right now. We have a young man that came in from from Vermont and has just turned the page on that school as far as attitude and aspiration of students, involvement of parents, involvement of the staff in the schools. There's ownership in what they're doing. It's not status quo. And that's something I don't think you can, that's not something that money necessarily is going to pay. Because this guy came from the same neck of the woods.
Those parameters of leadership, and school attitude, and teacher attitude, all those things are impacted by funding. They're impacted by funding. I'm choosing where I'm going to go to work. I look at the different test level of skill, I look at the pay level of skill, I look at the community level of skill. That funding. I think the part, and I don't want to be simplistic on this and not value the high works in here. What I see is that we have the elder male doctor, wanting to be equal. The thing we have now, what bothers me is it makes no sense to me to keep on doing the same thing over and over and over and over again and expect the results. I mean, someone must have said that before, that the guy being able to need. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to do that. And now it's time to move, because at least we have a plan to try something to improve it. If we go back and say, well, we have to worry about how the principal is doing it, the superintendent, that's just peddling water for another 10 years. I think we have to take a step and say, you know what, we have to move. Because what we're doing, we know is not working. It's not working to make all youngsters in New Hampshire educated and wanting to stay in New Hampshire, train to stay in New Hampshire, but they don't have the basic skills. We can't equalize across the state. That's the part that jumps out to me more than anything, Rick, is the fact that we need to make sure that New Hampshire improves and that this current method, not this document, this current method does not work. What did work when we did that, as Representative Miles said, we had to do better than nothing. But we've gone past that stage. We've gone past that stage. So I think we need to step a little bit bolder here and make, I know I recommend it. So we move forward to something that may work, but you know what we have now doesn't work. We can't hold this up waiting for the social, emotional types of variables in leadership and those types of things to make. I just like buying it. They stop the field because they go back and how the kids couldn't tell me stop. I mean, that's it.
Yes.
Just a principle on assessment, what we would use to determine whether a school or students were being successful or not. I mean, it struck me when you talked about that NHTI program with Beth Jordan, and that 63% cutoff they used on the active list when the students come in. Most of the students going into the community college system are from New Hampshire. They know that that's probably there. Of the 63% who were below 63%, they know exactly what New Hampshire high school they're coming from. You could sort that out and say, well, okay, fill in the blank here. High school so-and-so, 13% of the kids going into the community college system are testing below 63% or even lower. And then the issue becomes, okay, and that's not an issue of, did we teach algebra in the ninth grade or did we do it in the 11th grade? Those are graduates. Those are people who got whatever the full range was that they could get in high school. And that's good hard data. Suggesting that the active placer, the NHTI, story become any controlling part of this, but there are ways of figuring out, starting to get into what are specifics of high schools in this case, that need to be looked at, and that's just a math. That's just a math. That's just one here.
Thank you. I think that where you're hitting on this issue of accountability and using the data we have, that should be something that when we look at and hear that the strength of this bill is that these performance outcomes and then there will be accountability. I think the question has to be always asked, how are you going to get that accountability? How are you going to discern it? Is it going to be based upon the data that's submitted every year to DOE, which shows the number of kids in this category, and this category? Or are we going to actually take something like Beth Dorian had at the community college system and go back and find out, okay, these are the places these students are coming from. And I wouldn't be surprised that if you had some schools which had kids coming like that came out of schools which have the dollars to deliver a pretty good education. In other words, it wouldn't be just all poor communities. If 60% of the kids arriving in the community college system were not proficient in mathematics, that's a deeper issue. And by throwing money at something, do we always repair it? Not always. We want to get to those efficiencies and good use of our dollars and see the student achieve. I think there are some non-dollar issues which highly contribute to performance of students, and we can't negate that. And don't think that this is going to be the fix to it all. I don't think it's going to be the fix to it all. Reverend Porter had her hand up first.
Wouldn't that presuppose a certain amount of, most likely, students coming from poor communities would be the more likely students to be attending out of high school or community college. I mean, not all over the place, but someone who has issues paying for college because their economic standing would not be likely to choose to go someplace they can't afford. A lot of kids get out of high school and they go to community college because they can afford it. They don't have to take a lot of loans. And would that be an indicator? There's a lot of kids that are not performing mathematically like they should at the community college level. Is that a function of the high school not preparing them well, or is that another function of socioeconomic status influencing, the rich get rich and poor get poorer kind of attitude? These communities don't have a lot of money to spend in their schools. Students don't have a lot of money to spend on college. So I guess I'm not making sense here.
Well, you are, but if you were to look at
The idea that these kids are going here because that's what they can afford. They pay for schools that don't have a lot of money. Is it really an indicator of how well the school is doing, or is it an indicator of how much money their parents have?
Well, I think that a lot of kids go into the community college system now. You notice those coming out of the vocational education CTE program, as mentioned this morning, that they're coming out with 75% of the kids are going on to college from the CTE programs. Their scores are 5 percentage points higher than the scores coming out of high schools. They're also coming out 100% with skills and job opportunity. In terms of the foundations you spoke about, when I met with a group of teachers this last week and we were talking about preparation and what's going on in mathematics at the high school, it turns out that after talking with these math teachers from the middle, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them there through high school, that the foundation wasn't really what they wanted to see coming out of the elementary schools. So it's not necessarily, we see the waterfall effect at the 6th grade, 7th grade, where the scores start dropping. But is that where we have to start repairing? And
First grade and second grade is pushing everything down. It's always someone else's fault. These kids don't have the skills they need. I mean, you get your kid at school, we used to say, they don't come in prepared for.
I know you're elementary teachers here. It's a lack of communications in the schools.
We got to start teaching them when they're in preschool.
We got to ensure the academic standards set for the 3rd grade by the state are being taught in the 3rd grade. Or in accordance with competencies, and where the child is, it may be a spectrum, blocks along the way. But go ahead. Representative Cornell.
I bet kids going to school in Lebanon are entering kindergarten reading because they've gone to really great preschools and their parents have taken them to the library and sat on the road. And I know a kindergarten teacher in Manchester who's beside herself because the kids came in not knowing their colors. Because they're coming in from a totally different background whose parents probably are thinking about where are we getting tonight's dinner or where are we sleeping tonight because there's couch jumping. And they're not coming in that way. So do you go back to kindergarten who already knows how to read? Or do you have advanced programs? Well, this school is having to deal with, well, this is black and this is red
And I had a kindergartner who told
Representative Porter.
What are these things? She had never seen a crayon.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Okay. So back to 1680 here. But,
here.
no, the discussion's a good discussion.
You're talking about accountability, and I would not agree with Margaret on these broad sweep of community colleges. I think kids' financial issues may be a concern. Some of the curriculums of community college now are so strong, so well-founded. Kids look to go to that program, and not because of that. Community college is way beyond what we thought in my mind, 30 years ago. But we know from in the high school, they're never able to get to high school, middle school. We know in the high school, you can go back and any test, you can go back and see and track backwards to see when that sequence was supposed to have been taught, by whom it was supposed to be taught, and when. I mean, anything go back to curriculum with tests like test structure. And they could do in middle school and elementary school. So you have to know to see where it was missed from the youngster. Not people trying to assign blame to people, where was it missed in the curriculum, and where with the remediation. So you still can do that, and that can be an accountable piece, because now, if you look at, you were talking about community college, but look at often you were talking about the amount of remediation needed at the 4-year institutions. Right? It's easy for a 4-year college, like UNH, Columbus State, and those, like, what high school did that youngster come from? He's missing skill X, Y, and Z. And start to look at that way, that those school systems need help. Now, I would assume that perhaps DOE has done something like that analysis, but the college can really tell you when you look at the remedial enrollment, remedial courses they require, and then you look at what school the youngsters came from. But that does give us a base. It does give a base that these kids are not prepared. And then that's the schools that need additional help. So it is one level of accountability. We don't have any accountability now. And so we can start to let DOE and other people have and curriculum thinking, start aligning with what things should be if you want to have a standardized curriculum and standardized testing, and that's fine. But we can find where that starts in this. So that if the youngster comes into my school or school and they don't have that tells them right away that school needs additional support, maybe K or pre-K along the way. That's not telling us any different than the data tells us, the professor knows. The Manchester youngsters need more support, more resources. So there is a way to break all that stuff down. But I think we can become lost in the goal of this 1680, which is to move forward so we start to break resources down. Because there's no resources being broken down. One of the,
Representative Myler?
On that point, one of the things I think you'll find in other states that have greater funding for schools is that they have a greater hammer, yeah, I hate to use that term, but have greater resources and greater hammers and greater resources available to schools that need help. And I think what 1680 is trying to do is to try to take, again, the current amount of money that we have, and how do we allocate that and target it more so that in those districts that need the additional help, they can get the additional help. I mean, the Hanovers and the Hopkintons and the Portsmouth, they're going to go on. They're going to be okay. But when we used this when we were dealing with the, in 2018 on the funding committee that Rick and I were on, one of the things we discovered was that a place like Claremont, for example, Claremont had 5 different superintendents in 6 years. Now, there is no leadership there at that point in time. Principals don't know who to turn to. School boards have a problem with that. And that all goes back to the issue of where the funding is there. And so I think as we look, it's a systemic kind of a look that we need to review here. And I think that's what 1680 is trying to do, is trying to look at it from a systemic standpoint and provide greater resources
Mr. Chair.
to make
Yes.
sure that there's an equal educational opportunity for all.
Representative Ames?
Yeah, I just, I don't want to get out of my depth here, and you guys are way over my head. But there are 2 sections in 1680 that seem to me very relevant to this discussion. And one is 11 and the other is 13. Page 10 is the first one. So the first one is about underperforming schools. And there's a process called for in this bill that would look at, that would require the Board of Education, the Commissioner of Education, to have a system that would be developed that would use student performance data. And there is not just one piece of data, one measure of performance. It's across a range that would be selected. And to determine if there are one or more schools out there, and of course there are, that are, quote, underperforming. And then it requires a process to adjust that. So that's the first thing I wanted to point out. And then section 13, section 12 is basically responding to that underperforming school situation. Section 13 is persistent disparities. And this relates more to groups of kids, student subgroups that are persistently, notwithstanding the new system for allocating funds, not doing so well. So persistent disparities. And again, there's this identification process using measures that are sophisticated, that are not just outcomes on a particular test, but across the range of measures, and identifying that there are these persistent disparities and developing a plan. I think there's a 3-year plan called for in the bill to address the persistent disparities. So I just wanted to throw that out there without getting into the weeds of it, because I can't handle that. But this is a bill that is not simple. It understands and addresses and calls for people to address the complexities of children in our society, and of bringing that to them an education that's going to be adequate and sufficient to enable each of those children at least to have the opportunity to come through the whole thing in as good a way as is possible.
On that point, I think
Representative Myler?
1680 is a reformation. It's a reformation of how we fund schools. In the past, when we were on the study committee on 2018, we tweaked it on the side, added a little bit here, a little bit there. This is a reformation, and it has to have a very serious look, because it can create a whole different way of funding schools that will take us into 2030. And I don't want to minimize this, because this is not a tweaking of the system. This is changing the system. And that's why the serious study of this is so important, because if we are going to try to maximize the current funding system that we have in a different way, it does take deep thought and deep consideration as we move forward, rather than just continue to do exactly what we've done in the past.
Do you feel comfortable with the amount of money that we're allocating in this and towards that performance outcome based upon the data that we've been able to extract from the DOE 2820 form?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that now granted, there are gradual increases that are going to take place, as there would be in anything. But it's a matter of, as you look at that pool, how do you allocate that pool differently? And that's what, and so as AIR, which is the outside group, remember this is the outside group, the first outside group since Augenblick. And Augenblick was in what, mid-80s. So over 40 years, this is the first time we've had an outside group come in, look at our information, look at our data, and basically say, here's how you can take that current data and deal with it in a different kind of a way than what we've done in the past. And so that's kind of why I'm excited about this, because I think, I mean, little did I realize when I proposed this thing on the floor of the House that it would get to where it is right now, because it has created the conversation. That's what we try to do here, Rick, is to create this kind of conversation about where do we want this funding of schools to go in a deeper kind of a way than just tweaking it a little bit here. I will say that Representative Umberger, I think she did a very good job in the group that we worked on, Rick. We had a lot of data that came in, had a lot of people bring stuff in, but in the end, we wouldn't take that step. We said, no, little here, which is exactly what we've been doing since Claremont 1. I mean, the courts have told us, fix this damn thing. And the legislature has refused to take what the courts have said to us and create a different system.
Well, I wouldn't go that far and say the legislature's refused.
Oh, I get a little excited, yeah.
Well, okay, well, what I'd like to do is ask you a question. Does the DOE 25 form, the results we get, disaggregate the costs associated with the adequate education from other costs which are not necessary for an adequate education? Or are you relying on the total average of the DOE 25 form tuition cost, which it appears to me we are doing that? We didn't disaggregate all those components that contribute to an adequate education, referencing 193E.
And I think that's one of the things we need to look at. I mean, for example, does having a swimming pool add to your education? I mean, I don't know how that would fit into the Form 25, but I think that AIR has looked at some of that stuff, and we can get them back in here and look at it again. That the department updates their data every time they have those forms that do come in. So my sense is that we should be able to look at it.
Yeah, I would think that's a necessary component we need to do. However, I don't know if DOE has that. When this information comes in, it takes their assets, it takes their revenues, it takes their expenses. That's the DOE 25 form. And it has, like you say, the swimming pool program in there, it has a football program in there, which are not related to, well, they're related in a long distance way, because I'm always been a proponent of co-curricular activity, but it's not necessarily going to contribute to the results that we see on the statewide assessment of language arts, reading, and mathematics, or to the results we get on the SAT or the ACT. So I think that that's an area that, anything that moves forward, I think we got the concepts, many of them sprinkled through here are concepts which I think we can all latch onto. The data that we're getting is the only data available at DOE. So that's what we've got to use. And I'm not so sure that, I feel comfortable with, jacking the cost of an adequate education up based upon something which is not related to an adequate education. Yes, Representative Leckis, welcome.
Sorry, I was over in the other room waiting for you guys and working on this and fell asleep. And I woke on and I'm like, where is everybody? But the section that he was calling our attention to, section 3, page 12, line 28, I can see that as being useful for every single school. Why do we have to wait for a school to fail 3 years in a row or whatever before we start doing that? That's the kind of stuff we need now, is what are you spending your money on? What plans do you have? How are you using it? How is this affecting the education? All that kind of stuff. I would love to, that section in there, just put it in and require all schools to do it. I think it would be excellent.
Further comments from the committee today? Further comments? Yeah. Okay, thank you. What we have is the next date for this subcommittee to meet is going to be immediately following the co-op bills, which are heard on the 12th, which is a Wednesday at 9:30. So we will tie it in. So I would say probably the co-op bills should go fairly quickly. I think we're almost there with those. So I would say by 10:30, we ought to be ready to take 1680. This will be the last subcommittee of 1680. We will be making recommendations to the full committee for action, and that full committee has been scheduled for the 24th of October. Seeing later that week, all reports have to be done for the calendar.
And what's the date?
Pardon me?
Date?
For which one? The 24th? The 24th of October?
No, the one you were talking about, the co-op bills, and then at 10:30.
Okay, yeah, that's on the 12th of October.
Okay. Yeah, you said Wednesday, but I didn't.
2 days after Columbus Day.
Yeah.
And then it's already in the calendar. The 24th's in the calendar, right? This date's, I don't think, in the calendar, the 12th. For the 1680? Oh, I got that in there. Great, thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else, thank you for coming today. And we're adjourned.
No.